disruptive.
America that I fought.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Been a fantastic day so far. So switching gears, because all over the news, well, not really all over the news. I actually kind of surprised there wasn't as much coverage as there should be. Dr. Anthony Fauci, Tony Science, made a confession, testimony at the hearing just recently about COVID, the Wuhan laboratory, gain of function research, and like typical Tony Fauci science, he continues to be in denial. He continues to be a pathological liar, to continue on his corrupted deeds of being a big pharmaceutical ploy, being the director of national health, in order to scam the entire nation into the pandemic that was and continues to be. And we're still covering this because, one, it is the big historical global-wide scam that has ever occurred in my lifetime. So I don't think, for me personally, I don't think I could ever get over this, even though we kind of drifted away from the COVID virus. We kind of drifted away to accepting that it's just a new version of the flu, if you will. And the reason I bring that up is because someone literally told me the other day, we were having a conversation about COVID, and someone literally told me, well, Jason, that was in the past. That was in the past. We got to move on. We got to move on from the fact. And I felt like the reason they're only saying that is because they don't want to admit that they were one of the people at fault. They were the ones that were trying to silence me. They were the ones trying to, point the finger and say that I was some sort of conspiracy nut, that I was trying to kill people, that, me looking into the research, I was so dangerous. I was doing my own research. I don't have any medical background whatsoever. And now they don't want to acknowledge it. But the reason we have to acknowledge it, one, being a historical scam of my lifetime, but also the fact that the agenda behind it, all the totalitarian measures, all the mandates, is still continuing on. And it's still continuing on, part of this agenda that's going to move into the next pandemic. Wink, wink. Because it's already being played out. So, you may recall, and we've shown this numerous times, we've shown you this article. This is back from 2021, where they admitted in a major shift, the NIH admits funding risky virus research in Wuhan. So that was the time when people were discussing where this origin came from. And that's where the lab leak theory came to be. People discussing the fact that, hey, isn't it kind of interesting that it started in Wuhan, the same place that has this laboratory that studies coronavirus, that virologists practice the idea of creating these diseases that are contaminant and could spread easily so that they can manufacture an antidote to treat that virus. Isn't a common practice over there? They told us that came from a wet market, and they still continue to deny that, even though it is pure common knowledge now. It is acknowledged now that this has been going on for a long while. This has been going on for many, many years, that corporations like Pfizer, Moderna, the NIH, the CDC, all these big, giant conglomerates in medical sciences have done this for a long time. It's been a business model of theirs to create these diseases so that they could capitalize off of treating those diseases. It's no suspicion. So that was back in 2021, they admitted to this. And here's the New York Post admitting this again in 2024. Now, why would they have to reiterate this? Well, it's because even during the testimony, even after all of this has been acknowledged, the fact that the New York Post, Vanity Fair, and other publishers have come forward to admit to this, that they couldn't hide from the pharmaceutical mafia anymore, they had to admit to this, Fauci is still pathologically lying about this. And this is a tweet coming from the McCullough Foundation. Dr. Peter McCullough, one of the most renowned doctors, got silenced out in this mayhem. It says, breaking. Dr. Fauci still denies that the NIH funded gain of function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, contradicting previous testimony by Dr. David Morans, who stated that the NIH did indeed fund this research. So, this is when Fauci appeared in front of Congress and was supposed to testify. This is the moment where he's supposed to come clean. This is where they're supposed to admit exactly how much of a criminal that he is, because he is a criminal. And even though he's going to get away with this regardless if he lies or doesn't lie, but he still pathologically lies. He's a pathological liar and a convicted criminal that's still able to have this exorbitant amount of power and control over everybody in the United States. So listen to this.
Dr. Fauci, did the National Institute of Health fund the potentially dangerous enhanced potential pandemic pathogens gain of function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
I would not characterize it the way you did. The National Institutes of Health, through a sub-award to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, funded research on the surveillance of and the possibility of emerging infections. I would not characterize it as dangerous gain-of-function research. I've already testified to that effect a couple of times.
So you're saying no?
I wouldn't characterize it as some sort of deadly practice. I wouldn't characterize it. I'm gonna make it sound a little more sweet, like we were just doing medical research. It's more family friendly than saying that we were doing gain of function research as deadly practice and everyone knows about. We can't do that. I wouldn't characterize it. This guy already off the bat, even if you have no idea who this guy is, who this sick, twisted bastard of this guy is, you already know he's a pathological liar just on the fact that, oh, well, I wouldn't characterize it. You notice that he didn't even just say no. He had to twist this around. He had to feed around the bush because everybody knows that there's gain-of-function research. Everybody knows that the secret is out. So he can't hide from this anymore. But now he's trying to hide the wording of this. So no, it's not a dangerous practice. Not as dangerous as me harming puppy dogs for other medical research that also got exposed.
Correct? In his May 16th,
I'm saying no because they've said no multiple times, including on the transcribed interview.
In his May 16th, 2024 testimony, the NIH Deputy Director Tabak said, and I quote, "I can tell you that the failure of the Wuhan Institute of Virology to provide us with the data that we requested and the lab notebooks that we requested certainly impeded our ability to understand what was really going on with the experiments that we have been discussing this morning." My question to you, Dr. Fauci, if the NIH didn't inspect the Wuhan Institute of Virology and NIH didn't receive the lab books and data from China, and the required reports from EcoHealth Alliance were not submitted, in fact, they were late, how can you definitively say that the NIH did not fund the dangerous gain-of-function research?
I go back to what I said, that the gain-of-function research by the operative and regulatory definition of P3CO does not include at all the viruses that were studied under the sub-award.
How do you know that, sir, if there was no lab books, nothing from China?
We know what viruses they were studying.
How? How do you know? You never went there.
I'm telling you that the NIH funded research on these viruses. If someone else somewhere in China was doing something else,
well, and that's the problem, because NIH did.
Well, I can tell you that we were actually funding the sciences in China, but we aren't actually funding gain-of-function research. I wouldn't characterize it. I know my Tony Fauci voice isn't up to date. I'll practice on it. Trust me. Someone should fund me some gain-of-impression research. I can do a better Fauci impression. Again, this is hysterical because he is a pathological liar. The word is out. Everyone knows about this. Everyone knows that he's a pathological liar. And you can tell there's a lot of tells there. There's a lot of tells because he can't openly just state no anymore or say that's a lie. He has to say, well, I wouldn't characterize it. I wouldn't exactly use that wording. I mean, we did actually take some money and funded people in China and laboratories in China, and we know about the viruses that they were creating, but I wouldn't call it gain of function. I wouldn't actually use that wording because that would actually make me seem like a supervillain. But again, it only just exposes yourself even more because now at least you're admitting the fact that money did get transferred to these laboratories, and you know about the viruses that they're creating. So you knew that COVID virus was erupting in this laboratory. You know that they were potentially manufacturing this pathogen that got released to the world, and yet there's no documentation to warn people about it. So Dr. Fauci, Anthony Tony Science, just dug himself further down his own rabbit hole, further down his own hole of mass corruption and secrecy and lies. And just all this does is exposes him even more of a heinous villain that he is and a pathological liar.
Didn't go there. You didn't get the reports that were needed. How in the world would you know? I'm going to go on to the next question.
And you're not hearing what I'm saying.
Dr. Morenz, your senior advisor for over 20 years, said in an email dated February 24th, 2021, I learned from your FOIA lady here now how to make emails disappeared when I am FOIA'd, but before the search starts, so I think we are all safe. Plus, I deleted most of these earlier emails after sending them to Gmail. In another email dated 4/21/21, Dr. Morenz said, I forgot to say, there is no worry about FOIAs. I can either send stuff to Tony, meaning you, on his private email or hand it to him at work or at his house. He is too smart to let colleagues send him stuff that could cause trouble. Dr. Fauci, were you ever engaged in attempts to obstruct the Freedom of Information Act and the release of public documents?
No.
So FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act, and that was supposed to allow people that were trying to acknowledge this and investigate this and doctors to do medical research to, actually follow up on the science, which is the whole purpose of science. Is to look at the data, analyze it, question that data, do your own, analysis and do your own fact checking on it. That's how you build upon science as a scientific method for that reason. They denied all that. They didn't allow people to get they went past the Freedom of Information Act directly to Fauci. And then Fauci contained that information away from the general public. And later on, we'll show in the emails that they purposely misconstrued those emails. They not only deleted them, but they misspelled key words so that people doing research and investigators and journalists weren't able to look up the data. They were purposely construing that information away from the general public because if the general public found out, they would know how much of a villainous person this guy is. How Anthony Fauci, who back in the 90s people were protesting about his work with AIDS treatment, and he should have been convicted and locked away for prison, still continues to reign as some sort of medical expert.
Did Dr. Morenz communicate with you about official business using his private email?
Official business? No.
Did you ever encourage Dr. Morenz to use his private email address for official business?
No.
And just continues to lie. Continues to lie. And you know how I know exactly how much of a liar this is? Well, you may recall this clip that we showed from CNN. This was back in the early days of COVID, actually, that they were interviewing the former CDC director, about lab leak theory. And the former CDC director that got pushed away from the CDC because, hey, why don't we just buy out the agency that's supposed to monitor the heinous act of big pharmaceuticals? We can just buy them out and get away with our heinous, villainous, supervillain acts. Actually reported on the fact that, hey, this contaminant was actually manufactured in a laboratory that was already working on coronaviruses. Then here's what this guy said at the beginning of the pandemic.
If I was to guess, this virus started transmitting somewhere in September, October in Wuhan.
September, October.
That's my own view. It's an only opinion. I'm allowed to have opinions now. I am of the point of view that I still think the most likely.
And the only reason they're saying he's allowed to have opinions, this is his opinion on this, is because he knows that Fauci is watching. He knows that Bill Gates is watching. He knows that the World Health Organization is watching. That's funded by these two. He knows that there's a deadly mafia that's surveilling people and making sure that word doesn't get out. So him saying that, oh, it's an opinion of mine that there's a lab leak possibly making this manufacture, that's him to cover himself because he knows that he's going to get silenced out and possibly worse. We've seen how they treat people when they release information to the public.
Etiology of this pathogen in Wuhan was from a laboratory, escaped. Other people don't believe that. That's fine. Science will eventually figure it out. It's not unusual for respiratory pathogens that are being worked on in a laboratory to infect a laboratory worker.
It is also not unusual for that type of research to be occurring in Wuhan. The city is a widely known center for viral studies in China, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which has experimented extensively with bat coronaviruses.
It is a remarkable conversation I feel like we're having here because you are the former CDC director and you were the director at the time this was all happening.
For the first time, the former CDC director is stating publicly that he believes this pandemic started months earlier than we knew, and that it originated not at a wet market, but inside a lab in China.
These are two significant things to say, Dr. Redfield.
And that's not implying any intentionality. It's my opinion, right? But I am a virologist. I have spent my life in virology. I do not believe this somehow came from a bat to a human, and at that moment in time, the virus that came to the human became one of the most infectious viruses that we know in humanity for human-to-human transmission.
And that was stated at the start of the pandemic. This is when they wouldn't even tell people how this originated. They were just fear-mongering to the bone, saying that we got locked down, we don't know anything about this virus, we have no control over it. We got to shut down the schools. We got to keep your kids home. We got to make sure everyone stays inside. Do not go outside because getting sunlight and fresh air is the most dangerous part of this virus, apparently. And they kept this under the dark for so long. And what's amazing to me is still to this day, you don't hear any mainstream media sources, none of the late night comedians, none of the headliner shows anywhere in, the main streets of America or North America. You don't even hear podcasters that host government secret shows or exposing files even bring this up. One of the biggest global conspiracies to date. They don't even mention about this. Instead, they'll yell at me for saying, oh, why are you bringing this up? It's in the past. COVID's in the past. We're done with it, okay? Let's just move on. Why do you have to keep bringing this up? I don't know, maybe the fact that suicide rates skyrocketed, opioid abuse skyrocketed during the pandemic, that they never mentioned about this. How about the fact that unexpected deaths have been circulating, that no one's investigating? How about the fact that 3/4 of small businesses in Toronto alone were forcibly closed to shut down for good, and they will never cease to operate? Why don't you tell it to those family members that had mom and pop stores in the city that lasted generations, and they got told by the government, you have to shut down and screw yourself. Go tell to them that COVID's no big deal. Get over it. This is why I have to bring this up. This is why this is so important to hold this accountable. And we need to hold these people accountable. We need to expose Fauci. We need to expose Theresa Tam here in Canada because she was also conspiring with big pharmaceuticals to happen the exact same notions here in Canada that has caused huge amounts of problematic situations during this. The virus itself was the least we had to worry about. It was everything that followed with the virus. The lockdowns, the mandates, the restrictions, the censorship, the fact that they massively fired a bunch of healthcare workers, and now they're scrambling around because our healthcare system is in scrambles right now. Our healthcare system is deteriorating, and they're blaming it on the fact that we just don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough ICU beds. Well, guess what? They restricted that during the pandemic. They fired all those nurses. They fired all those doctors because they didn't want people to actually cure each other. They didn't want actually responsive health care. They just want people to give them pharmaceuticals. Tell them the vax is okay. Which I can tell you is very safe and effective. So, I'm just showing you all this information so that you're aware of all this information. And you can decide for yourselves. But I can tell you from the great state of YouTube and all the medical professionals that work at this social media platform, that's very safe and effective. That the WHO is very trustworthy. And what I'm just showing you here is just what other people are saying. So you judge for yourself.